Andrew Smith, host of Kennedy on Fox Business, Kennedy herself. The editor of townhall.com, Katie Pavlich, is here. And outnumbered Fox and Friends Weekend co-host Pete Hegseth. And a salute from the veteran himself.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Woo.
I'm sad like you're sad. The games were rough yesterday for Minnesota fans.
They were rough. I thought all the games were great. I thought Jacksonville played well.
You thought our game was great?
Listen,
that wasn't a good game.
They scored first. The Vikings scored first.
I hate for this visual, but I changed, we've all changed explosive diapers in our life.
Ooh, all right.
I changed one this morning. That was better than watching the game that I watched. It was terrible.
Thank you for that visual, Pete.
I'm sorry, guys. You know what I'm talking about.
Good to see you there, Pete.
Spoiler alert. Later on my Instagram page, a picture of you doing something Skoll.
Okay. From yesteryear.
Let's move on to the news. A critical procedural vote is expected to happen any moment now on the Senate floor. Senators need 60 votes to break a filibuster. And if that happens, they can then take up a temporary spending measure to end the government shutdown. I said temporary. It'll be a few days. For now, we're on day 3 of the actual shutdown. And Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas says the effect is starting to show.
The shutdown is beginning to have its most dramatic effect, not only on our military and on children's health insurance, but also on federal workers who are uncertain about what their future is. And my hope is that Senator Schumer and Senate Democrats will realize that this is not a hostage that they want to take.
President Trump tweeted this: "Great to see how hard Republicans are fighting for our military and safety at the border. The Democrats just want illegal immigrants to pour into our nation unchecked. If stalemate continues, Republicans should go 51% nuclear option and vote on real long-term budget no CRs!" Exclamation point. And Democrats have shut down our government in the interest of their far-left base. They don't want to do it, but are powerless. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says the president has been working behind the scenes.
The president's been incredibly engaged. He's talked to a number of members over the weekend. He's also had his staff working with members on both the House and Senate side and trying to advocate for reopening the government. Look, I think what we saw on Friday was the president's attempt to try to work with Chuck Schumer. I think the disappointment there is that Senator Schumer showed he was not an honest broker in this.
Suggesting the president is the one in the way.
The president has not been helpful. Every opportunity he has, where you think you're moving forward, he changes his mind after he talks to someone else on his staff. So the president has not exercised the leadership that we need from the president of the United States.
Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live for us on Capitol Hill. Lots of action today, Mike.
Harris, no doubt about it. And Arizona Senator Jeff Flake, who was a no Friday night, a Republican no, says he thinks they could get to 60 votes, so that's something to watch. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's been trying to reassure Democrats that he's serious about addressing their priorities if they reopen the government.
So long as the government remains open, it would be my intention to take up legislation here in the Senate that would address DACA, border security, and related issues, as well as disaster relief, defense funding, health care, and other important matters.
The action this hour is expected to be on the Senate floor for that critical procedural vote. There's also been a bipartisan push, about 25 senators trying to find a way out of the shutdown. A couple of the Democrats involved in these negotiations talked about their efforts.
I was more negative last night, than I am today. I think we made some progress on some ideas about how to make sure we're moving forward on that long-term budget, while at the same time getting a vote on some bill that would protect the Dreamers from being deported.
We're hopeful that some additional confidence-building measures, some strengthening in terms of the terms that they could say to each other will be sufficient to help us move forward. But there's a lot of challenges here in terms of people trusting each other.
The first couple of days of the shutdown were over a weekend, but now the House Speaker notes the impact is being felt by many Americans.
You're seeing furloughed workers across America today. You're seeing troops not getting their pay, Border Patrol not getting their pay, law enforcement, national parks. I can go on and on and on. This is totally pointless and needless. Senate Democrats did this. Senate Democrats are the ones who can stop this, and that's at noon today.
This vote in the Senate would require 60 yes votes on a 3-week government funding package. A similar vote on a 4-week government funding package failed late night Friday and led to this shutdown. Harris?
Mike Emanuel, thank you very much. Pete, something that kind of lit up the social media airwaves was a little tweet I put out over the weekend about why Congress is still getting paid. You go to some of their congressional pages and they say their staff, some of them are not essential.
Oh, I agree.
The military.
Well, the double standards are rampant. The military is not getting paid, but they'll get back pay. I'll tell you this. Members of Congress should not only not be paid, but they shouldn't get back pay. If you can't do your job, you shouldn't get paid. And I think that's where the American people are. Listen, this shutdown, Democrats know it's bad for them. They do. Behind the scenes, they understand this is bad for them. It is the Schumer shutdown. Question is, what's more important to them, 2018 or 2020? Because your 2018 senators are voting for the continuing resolution. They want the government open because they know it hurts them. Your 2020 contenders on the Democratic side, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they're driving to their leftward base, and they want the shutdown to continue, I think, all the way to State of the Union. They want the government to be shut down during the State of the Union. Those are the two polarized sides of the Democrat Party, and this vote we see today will be an indication of what's more important.
Yeah, for them, it's a strategy.
Yeah, it's so sickening because the military gets paid on the 1st and the 15th. So if they can figure this out, maybe they won't have to settle for back pay while they keep, democracy and freedom around the world.
Well, one of the reasons why Congress gets paid while the military does not is because it's a constitutional premise that Congress gets paid even in a shutdown. Now, that being said, Congress has the ability to change the law. And despite having multiple shutdowns over the course of the country being founded, they have decided not to change that law. And that is on them, which is why they are still getting paid. Some of them are now donating their salaries to charity during this period. But it doesn't take away from the fact that military families are not getting their paychecks. But moving back to the politics of this, absolutely. The Democrat Party has a very big problem on its hands when it comes to the far left of the party running the show here. You have the AP reporting about how middle-of-the-road, moderate Democrats, they do still exist, are trying to get out of. They're trying to get out of this thing. And
but
the bottom
that's
line,
what's leading to the optimism heading into this vote.
Yeah, and the bottom line is on the DACA issue, which is driving this entire issue. Democrats had the opportunity to do this under Barack Obama. They failed. It is now not the Republicans' job and the White House's job to make that happen.
So to that point, and I think that's a really critical point. This is when Democrats and Republicans could have come together, and instead of tackling health care and failing at that, which they absolutely have, they could have had meaningful, comprehensive immigration reform. And there were plenty of Republicans in Congress who were willing to have that conversation and vote for that legislation. They didn't do that. And so now, if the government shutdown is being held hostage over the DACA demands, which will then lead to further immigration discussions, it's because of that inaction. It used to be Republicans and Democrats. There were differences, but the differences were how you prioritize the most important things, what you saw as being the most important aspects for the country.
It doesn't appear there was any prioritization.
There is no prioritization, and they are paralyzed by the fear of not being reelected, and that's a horrible way to govern.
So as we continue to look live at the Senate floor there, this vote, if you could, Pete, sort of look forward as to where you see the outcome. Now, what we just heard was Senator Jeff Flake saying he thinks that they may get to 60 yeses. Okay,
maybe.
He said we think they are there. Senator Collins walking in says a deal isn't within reach. Senator Kennedy says we're at 53 yeses for Republicans. Let's see if we can get 7 Democrats on board.
I think what they know, to your point, Kennedy, is that they would have gotten a better deal on immigration, so-called comprehensive immigration reform, before. Now they have a president that truly believes we're not going to trade amnesty or something that looks like amnesty without getting a wall and an end to chain migration and an end to this problem. So Democrats are going to have to blink here. It depends on when. I think this president has taught Republicans how to fight. Republicans have not been good on that in the past. So if this vote happens, it will be a realization that the president is going to require funding the government before we have a conversation.
Can I follow up,
DACA.
though?
And he's been clear about that, and I think he'll win that.
A couple of things. First of all, we've seen tweets, but we haven't heard directly from the president. We have reports. We know behind the scenes there are conversations going back and forth. But the visual of the president that we saw with tax reform, we haven't seen, which is, it was helpful to see that deal maker on Capitol Hill.
But he did that, Harris. He met met with Dick Durbin, and then Dick Durbin ran to the cameras and talked about salty language.
Maybe all meetings should be on camera then. Maybe every meeting they have.
And that's what the president said. That was over a week ago. I'm talking about now that the government is
I would argue that this is not the president's job. The Congress runs the government. Congress funds the government. This is the president has actually very little to do with the way that Congress funds priorities. And so he has said, laid out on the table what his priorities are. They've talked about DACA not being part of this because it's a bigger issue. You already have Democrats talking about how they think DACA should be about more people than just the people in laying the ground, right? Which means amnesty overall. So the White House has actually laid the groundwork here. It's up to Congress to get this ready.
Him in particular, because he brings something different to the table.
But it has a lot to do with what the relationship is going to be going forward between the president and Democrats, right? I mean, Mark Short, the legislative director, he has suggested that the relationship between Democrats and the president is probably deteriorating through all this.
But the president did have a long meeting with who he calls his good friend, fake tears, Chuck Schumer, in the Oval Office, talking about getting closer to a deal.
That's true.
But they said they got closer, but you can't get closer until you separate the funding from DACA. And that's where Democrats are drawing a red line right now that I think they'll have to walk back from.
But there's also
fund the government, then deal about immigration.
But also the issue with DACA, and I think this is an important point, is there's a big difference between shielding people from deportation, which a vast majority of Americans agree that the people who were brought to this country essentially against their will as kids should be shielded from deportation. They shouldn't be forced to go back to places many of them have never been. That's something vastly different than amnesty. And amnesty is the big issue. And instead of politicizing it and running to the cameras, they need to sit down like rational human beings, put party aside for a second, and figure out what that really means and who gets amnesty. Because, you know, I love the idea of having hardworking immigrants come to this country, but being a citizen is something very important and special. If you join the military, if you have exceptional grades, if you started businesses, those are the kind of people who should be in line for amnesty first.
Absolutely. I just want to go back to the vote count here and how we might be able to get to a deal today. Last week, we had 5 Democrats vote in favor of moving forward. Mitch McConnell voted no just so he could come back today and vote yes. We have potential of 6 Democrats who are in states like Virginia, 2 of the senators from Virginia. There are a lot of federal employees in that state, and Maryland as well. Lots of federal employees, Ben Cardin and Chris Van Hollen. The Democrats up for re-election are really the ones to watch here because there are a number of them. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them that we are watching to see if they could push it past the finish line.
We need 7.
And they're in places like Montana, Ohio, Wisconsin. Right. So those are the ones they're going to be pressuring. And maybe if the White House gets more involved, they'll be making some phone calls to those offices to say, look at how your constituents voted. And by the way, the election was a referendum on illegal immigration. Don't screw it up.
2 people who would pretty much consider themselves a referendum on the president, Jeff Flake, and at sometimes Lindsey Graham are expected to be quick yays again.
Again, back to the 2018 versus 2020. If 2018 is more important to Democrats, then they're going to pass this and they're going to end the shutdown because it hurts them. But if, half the members of the Senate want to be president of the United States, a lot of them Democrats at this point in 2020, they want to cater to their base. And their base has demanded, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, keep the government shut down until DACA is solved. They believe in coupling.
But their base is the reason why Democrats lost 1,000 seats under Barack Obama, the far left base. We're talking about the coast here. We're talking about New York and California running the show. That is not how the rest of the country thinks and not how they feel about this deal.
No, but and to your guys' point, that when you push this to the far left, that's when people really dig their heels in.
Yes.
And when you push it to the far right, to the super hardliners on immigration, there's also a standoff. And it's exhausting and counterproductive if this is the only way we govern from now on. It's just kicking the can going from shutdown to shutdown.
February 8th is right around the corner.
As a Democrat in Alabama, they came up with this idea, this bill, to take the money for the military and make it separate from all of this. So basically to do what Dianne Feinstein wanted to do with DACA, they wanted to do for our military. Mitch McConnell said, no, I object to that. I watch a lot of C-SPAN, so I watched it live. And so he objected to that, and that would have put this in a different place, at least for that money. Why?
Leading Democrat Chuck Schumer, we are being told right now, our reporter on Capitol Hill letting us know that Senator Schumer will be speaking on the Senate floor in just the next few moments. We actually thought we were going to hear from him earlier today. There was sort of perhaps a stop, pause, don't speak yet. Now we are waiting on him possibly to step up and begin his comments on the Senate floor. We will take those when they begin. Obviously, that'll be an interesting and key moment, Katie.
Just to answer your question about why they wouldn't take that part, the military pay, out of it and have it stand alone. The truth is, because Republicans are using that as leverage as well. And they need that political
It takes away
point
some of the
to
urgency.
win.
You're right.
It was
They're
very
using it
powerful
that way.
news this morning. I don't know if
Actually,
you saw
out
it.
of all this, it is the only thing besides Chip that had urgency.
Right.
Because as we keep talking about, for DACA, they had at least until March. And when the judge stepped in and said, we want to keep everything in place, he can't even see it on his docket potentially till June.
Do you think if the president went to Chuck Schumer and said, listen, full amnesty for all the dreamers, build the wall, could he resist?
I don't
Could
know.
Chuck Schumer resist?
Why do we think he didn't say that on Friday? Why do we think that didn't happen?
I know we're
we
going to
didn't know
talk
what
about it
happened in
later,
that
but
meeting.
Luis
We weren't-
Gutierrez,
could have, Kennedy,
who's as hardcore as they come, Luis Gutierrez from Illinois, has said that exact same thing. If we care this much about so-called dreamers, illegal immigrants, then let them build the wall. I'll trade you a brick for a person. I mean, that's and for people who believe in law and order, then you solve the problem by building the wall so you don't revisit this.
Well, and that has been Republicans' argument. You can't just allow for this DACA amnesty, which includes their parents, by the way. It's not just about the children. It includes parents who are also living here illegally. You have to prevent the problem. And the whole point of border security is to make sure that we are not here again in 5 or 10 years with this exact problem, again with the government shutdown over this issue.
Well, and my big question is, with Democrats saying, well, we would do something like what you're talking about and get to February 8th if you could give us firm confirmation. Well, what's firmer than writing it down and signing it? Like, I don't understand what has to happen to make it firm confirmation that you're going to talk about it.
Pinky promise.
What's
Put it down on a notepad.
Those are solid.
Secret handshakes.
They are on the couch. When we pinky promise,
that's it.
But what's
that means we're lying.
You've heard the White House talk a lot about this deficit of trust with Chuck Schumer now that, and after the Dick Durbin meeting, there is a problem with trust. And when the only thing you can depend on is people's word when it comes to moving forward on this, that's a difficult gap to breach.
American public says, then let's hire some people who can trust one another. Let's focus now on Senator Chuck Schumer of New York. Take a little bit of water before he takes the floor. Let's watch and listen to this together.
We enter the third day of the Trump shutdown, the first ever real shutdown to occur when one party controls the entire legislative process. The Republican Party controls the House, the Senate, the presidency, and yet they were unable to keep the government open for the American people. Leader McConnell knows it takes 60 votes to win passage of a spending bill, and yet he moved forward with a last-minute extension that he knew lacked the votes. Both Democrats and Republicans voted against that bill. The reason the Republican majority had such difficulty finding consensus is they could never get a firm grip on what the president of their party wanted to do. These days, you never know who to deal with when it comes to the Republicans. The Republican leaders told me to work out a deal with the White House. The White House said work it out with Republican leaders on the Hill. Separately, President Trump turned away from not one, but 2 bipartisan compromises. Each would have averted this shutdown. Each would have led to a deal on the budget and health care and disaster aid and things like opioids and veterans and pensions and on immigration. My recent offer to the president was a generous one. I put his signature campaign issue on the table in exchange for DACA, and still, he turned away. President Trump's unwillingness to compromise caused the Trump shutdown and brought us to this moment. The facts are well known. Now I wish to update the Senate on where things stand after this weekend. Since our meeting in the Oval Office on Friday, the President and I have not spoken, and the White House refused to engage in negotiations over the weekend. The great deal-making president sat on the sidelines. Despite and because of this frustration, I've been having conversations with the Republican leader over the weekend about a path forward. After several discussions, offers, counteroffers, the Republican leader and I have come to an arrangement. We will vote today to reopen the government, to continue negotiating a global agreement, with the commitment that, if an agreement isn't reached by February the 8th, the Senate will immediately proceed to consideration of legislation dealing with DACA. The process will be neutral and fair to all sides. We expect that a bipartisan bill on DACA will receive fair consideration and an up or down vote on the floor. Now, it's a shame, Mr. President, that the American people and the Senate have had to endure such hand-wringing, finger-pointing stridency to secure a guarantee that we will finally move to address this urgent issue. It is something the majority could have avoided entirely, a concern the President could have obviated if he were only willing to take yes for an answer. While this procedure will not satisfy everyone on both sides, it's a way forward. I'm confident that we can get the 60 votes in the Senate for a DACA bill. And now there is a real pathway to get a bill on the floor and through the Senate. It is a good solution, and I will vote for it. I'm incredibly grateful to the bipartisan group that has come together in recent days to renew the immigration debate with a sense of urgency. There you are. I believe that this group has the potential to return the Senate to the kind of place it should be on the issue of immigration, a place for bipartisanship, a place for action, a place for achievement. The bipartisan group, in a very fine way, filled the glaring absence of the President in these talks. I expect the Majority Leader to fulfill his commitment to the Senate, to me and to the bipartisan group, and abide by this agreement. If he does not, of course, and I expect he will have breached the trust of not only the Democratic senators, but members of his own party as well. Through these complicated and lengthy negotiations, Democrats have always sought to be reasonable, to act in good faith, and get something real done. Despite all of our entreaties, the President was obstinate. Despite bipartisan support for DACA, the Republican majority dithered. The Senate has muddled along for too long, content to delay action on our most pressing challenges until the very last moment. That ends today. The Republican majority now has 17 days to prevent the Dreamers from being deported. Mr. President, we have a way to address the fate of the Dreamers, starting right now, instead of waiting until March, with the minority and the moderate middle empowered to bring a bill to the floor instead of being held by the most strident anti-immigration voices in the Republican caucus. And we, on our side of the aisle, will continue to fight as strongly as we can for the Dreamers in the weeks ahead. I say to all Americans, urge your senators to vote yes on the bipartisan compromise when it comes forward. Write, tweet, email, phone, visit, do everything you can so we can finally pass this bill. In a few hours, the government will reopen. We have a lot to do. The issue of the Dreamers demands resolution. A budget must be written. Health care has to be addressed. Relief provided to disaster-stricken parts of our country. Pensions and opioids, veterans, child care, all have to be taken care of. The Trump shutdown will soon end, but the work must go on, and it will. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
All right, so a few minutes there from the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, talking about the fact that he will put a signature on whatever comes up. He's going to vote yes. He says that they will have the Democrat votes to get this continuing resolution. And what he says is, he expects the GOP leader, Republican Mitch McConnell, to honor the February 8th. Oh, let's watch and listen. It's Mitch McConnell. I was looking at my notes. Let's watch.
Over the issue of illegal immigration is something the American people didn't understand and would not have understood in the future. So I'm glad we've gotten past that, and we have a chance now to get back to work. And therefore, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the mandatory quorum call be waived.
Is there objection? Without objection. The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the motion to concur with a further amendment in the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 195, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the motion to concur in the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 195 with a further amendment shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President, before we call the roll, I ask unanimous consent that the Democratic whip be allowed to address the chamber for 3 minutes with the gracious approval of the majority leader.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, let me thank you very much and thank the majority leader for this opportunity. And let me thank my friend, my colleague, and our leader on the Democratic side for his passionate personal commitment to this issue involving the Dreamers and DACA. He has been by my side, and I've been inspired by his leadership from the start. And let me thank my colleagues. So many of you cast a vote that was very hard and very difficult, because you believed, as I did, that the issue of immigration, the issue of the Dreamers, is the civil rights issue of our time. You stuck your necks out and said, I'm willing to go on record even if it's going to be hard to explain back home, and I will never forget that. The question now is how we move forward. What I have seen here on the floor of the Senate in the last few days is something we have not seen for years. Constructive, bipartisan conversations and dialogue on the floor, not just about this issue, which is obviously front and center, but about the future of this institution and what the Senate will be from this point forward. That, to me, has been encouraging, because it says to me that we do have an opportunity to work together. My special thanks to Senator Susan Collins, my friend, and Senator Lisa Murkowski, for joining with Jeff Flake and joining with Lindsey Graham and joining with Cory Gardner and others who've been working on this issue for so long to try to make a positive impact on this debate so that we can move forward. I cannot tell my colleagues how many have come up to me from the other side of the aisle and said, we're with you on this issue. We want to help you get this done. Each of them has a little different take on what that means, but I do believe them. And I do believe we have this opportunity to move together. Now comes the test, the real test, as to whether we can get this done, whether we can be the Senate again, whether we can return to a regular order on the floor and constructively have a debate. For some of you, it'll be the first time you've ever seen it. But believe me, it's worth the price of admission, all it took for you to come to the United States Senate. So now we have to stand together. My last word is this. We have gathered the largest bipartisan group of senators to ever commit to moving forward on the DREAM Act and immigration. We have a process. I want to thank Senator McConnell for explicitly saying today it will be a level playing field. It will be open to both sides. We will move to the issue, as you characterized it this morning, of DACA and immigration. Thank you for doing that. I believe that that sets the stage for us to work together. For the first time in 5 years, we will have a debate on the floor of the Senate on the DREAM Act and immigration. To all the Dreamers who are watching today, don't give up. I know that your lives are hanging in the balance on what we do here on Capitol Hill and with the White House. 3 weeks from now, I hope to be joining you in celebrating the passage with you and your families and your communities
of a measure which will strengthen America and give you an opportunity to be part of our future. Mr. President, I yield.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Blumenthal.
All right, so as we watch what's happening on the Senate floor, we will have heard from the leaders on the Democratic side, Chuck Schumer and Dick Durbin, just then, talking about the fact that what this does and the reason why they are going to vote yes to reopen the government today. So part of that was for the Senate and most of it was for their constituents, I would imagine. The reason that they're going to vote yes to reopen the government today is that they feel now that they have that firm confirmation that at the end of the continuing resolution period on February 8th, they can then bring to the Senate floor a deal for DACA and Dreamers, which they say, and I'm going to quote Senator Durbin now, that they've gathered the largest group of bipartisan senator support to move on DACA and the Dreamers. And so what will that bill look like? Pete, we've been talking about the Gang of Six and some things with immigration that have been talked about in recent weeks.
So first of all, I think the big takeaway here is this is Senator Chuck Schumer blinking. They gave in. They said they were going to stand up to the president. We're going to get a DACA bill or shut down the government.
Well, did they get more than what they had been promised a week ago?
They got nothing. They're voting to open the government up because they realize it was a bad move for them politically. Absolutely. So they've been given a promise, they say, by the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, to then open into a discussion over DACA and illegal immigration, which is exactly what the president has said he wants to do. Let's debate that. Now, they call it, you heard Dick Durbin call it, the civil rights issue of our time.
It was ridiculous.
That is Democrats doubling down on. They are for illegals over citizens.
All right.
That's where the debate is right now.
Step into what's happening on the screen right now in case you're just tuning into Outnumbered and wondering, okay, where is everybody on the couch? We are so focused on what the government is doing right now. Is it going to be able to reopen on this vote? Democrats have said, their leadership has said, yeah, you'll get the 7 or so votes that you need to reopen the government. And this is the vote that's going on right now. So we are watching it live in real time together. Katie?
Well, Dick Durbin just got off the floor, and he's making a big to-do about this bipartisanship that has come together surrounding DACA. Bipartisanship on DACA fix has been there from the beginning. The only reason it became controversial was when Democrats decided to tie it to the continuing resolution. So now he's trying to take credit for all this bipartisanship that has been there from the beginning on this issue.
So I wanted to get in this bit of guidance from Chad Pergram, our producer there on Capitol Hill, saying that keep in mind that once the Senate approves the interim bill to reopen the government through February 8th, the bill must go back to the House. House and Senate will not be in alignment, is what he is pointing out. Something else that Chuck Schumer just said when he was speaking on the Senate floor a few moments ago, again, the voting is happening right now. He said, and Chad pointing this out, Schumer asked where dealmaker Trump was over the weekend. And it's an interesting question because he has been sort of laying low over the weekend. He had that meeting with Chuck Schumer on Friday, obviously. And I asked Sarah Sanders about this earlier, and she said, well, no, he's been working in the White House. Obviously, he put off his trip, and he's been working the telephones. But Katie, did you notice a sort of more quiet version of the president over the weekend?
Yeah, but I really don't think that this is necessarily the president's role to be coming up with a deal to fund the government. This is Congress's job. This is Congress's role. He's been clear about what he wants. He talked about DACA and ending DACA in September of last year and telling Congress to get it together to bring a bill to the floor after Democrats failed to do so under President Obama when they had a majority. And so, you know, I think that it was good for him to stay out of the way and let Chuck Schumer fight it out with Mitch McConnell, and Mitch McConnell won.
You know, the president was criticized for not taking a more active role behind the scenes during the health care debacle when Congress failed on that initiative. So if he's actually behind the scenes working the phones, visiting Capitol Hill, and talking to senators in particular, I think that's probably a smarter move for him, and let the shutdown take center stage and not some of the tweets and other distractions. But also, it's really interesting because there was obviously a big shift on the wall. And Chuck Schumer said, we talked about this before we heard the Senate Minority Leader speak. What if he was offered amnesty in return for the wall? It didn't sound like there was an offer of amnesty, but it sounds like he threw the wall on the altar before the president.
Something
can I
that
ask
never
you a
would
question?
have otherwise been under
and then the Democrats have been so obstinate about the wall, saying that is their red line, that is their point of resistance, never.
They should have read the law as it was put forth with an allocation of funding back in 2006, that there was quite a bit of that strong fence line or wall, as you'd like to say it, that had already been had funds put forth for it. And what the president has said, if you want to talk about a little bit of a shift or just a clarification, is what the White House is saying. He knows it's not a solid line along the border. It can't be. We have other places where it's perforated where you can't put a wall.
So Chuck Schumer, whose Twitter account has been somewhat quiet, he hasn't tweeted anything in the last 24 hours or so, just tweeted this: I expect Senate Majority Leader to fulfill his commitment to the Senate and abide by this agreement. If he does not honor our agreement, he will have breached the trust of not only the Democratic senators, but the members of his own party.
So this is a tactical retreat from the Democrats. But a very important note here: if they set the new deadline as February 8th, then they're retying DACA to the budget, which is what they just lost on. So it's I think it's a terrible idea for them, and I think Republicans should stick to their line. If you want some action on DACA, which is effectively amnesty, which it is, for potentially 3 to 4 million people, then we better get the wall as we campaigned on it, and we better get the end of chain migration.
Schumer says it's about the agreement, right? Well, what's the agreement? What were the terms? What were the terms of the agreement?
Yeah, is it a Lindsey Graham agreement or a Tom Cotton agreement?
Right, exactly. What are the details?
This is what Chuck Schumer said on the floor. He said that the Senate will immediately proceed to legislation on DACA and Dreamers Act for an up or down vote on February 8th if they don't get something before then. So it's automatically tied to what we're seeing now. No? But this ends the government shutdown.
Correct.
For at least a few days.
Correct. Yes. But the White House would never give away a DACA vote without getting a vote on the wall or chain migration or the visa lottery system. So it's not going to be a clean up or down on DACA. They won this fight. Now we move on to the next fight over immigration.
But I have a question. Is it because the president has been pushing the Senate to do away with some of these procedural issues and go straight to the nuclear option, which I think is a horrible idea? Because whatever party is in power, and Democrats have found this out the hard way, that's going to come back and bite you in the keister.
It's going to happen. Just why not be the ones to use it first?
You said earlier
they're going to use it eventually. I mean, we're going.
You said earlier. You said Senator Graham was talking about the fact that McConnell needs to use stronger language on DACA.
Who said that?
So how? And I think we might even have a. Can we take a quick peek? We might not want to go away from this vote if we think it's going to come up real quickly. So I'm going to listen to my ear for what they want us to do. Otherwise, we have Senator Graham on McConnell's language. If we want to watch that, let's watch.
I think if the majority leader says stronger words about we will go to immigration, he will say that if it matters. So some Democrats have to convince Mitch McConnell stronger language results in an outcome.
Interesting you see Susan Collins agreeing with him there, because she then took a chance to speak after that, and she said he needs to use not only stronger language but more specific language.
Well, maybe he did. That was earlier this morning before Chuck Schumer came to the floor to say that they were going to reopen the government based on this agreement. Now, again, we don't know what that agreement means, and they're going to be, and they're acting like this, this DACA issue is a very simple issue. It is not. It depends on how many people that are going to be included, what the cutoff date is. Are their parents going to be able to stay as well? What does that mean?
Look like?
Right. What does amnesty look like? Does this mean permanent status? Does this mean citizenship?
Anything else to call it besides amnesty?
Well, no, there isn't. You look at the screen right now. You see Mitch McConnell shaking hands with Dick Durbin. You see a video clip of Lindsey Graham standing with Susan Collins. For conservatives and Trump supporters, all of that is potentially worrisome. You don't want to see deals being cut that are ultimately look like the Gang of Eight deal, basically the comprehensive immigration reform that would have codified illegal status. So they're going to be worried about what comes next. Okay, so you cut a deal to open the government. The question is, will it be something the White House supports because it actually does what the president said it would do?
Will hardliners accept a term like permanent legal residency?
It's a great question. I think ultimately it depends on what they get.
As opposed to amnesty.
Yeah, as opposed to citizenship, because when you talk about amnesty, you can be talking about it in both those ways. Yeah. And permanent legal residency allows people to do all the things that you would normally do, but citizenship is different.
All right, so right now on the Senate floor, they are deciding to reopen the government on the Senate side, and then you heard Sandra say this will go back to the House. Now, what I'm understanding from House members is because the dates don't necessarily match up, the House version had the continuing resolution February 16th. If it comes back from the Senate with February 8th, what I'm seeing being reported reported via us on Fox News and elsewhere is that the House would then pass what the Senate has passed. So those dates might not match up. And that, go ahead.
No, and so I guess my question is, as I'm listening to you, so are we right back where we started?
No, we're in a different place now because the government's going to open.
Did the government shut down only to go right back where things were basically?
We're going to call it the mini shutdown.
Well, we don't know what kind of substantive confirmation that made Democrats feel better, or if it was hashtag Schumer shutdown. Like we don't know what the DACA deal looks like.
I think it's a threat of the nuclear option, and knowing that all of this could just get
maybe it's all these ingredients that make the scone.
So this is some reporting coming in from our sister network, delicious Fox Business. Adam Shapiro reporting a senior GOP source in the House tells Fox they expect the House to pass the Senate version of the continuing resolution later today, and it could be on the president's desk late this afternoon, early this evening, perhaps.
The only thing they have to reconcile are those two dates, and so they'll pass the Senate.
To your point, Harris, what changed is Democrats realized that this really was becoming the Schumer shutdown. It wasn't good for them in 2018, and they want to move past it and have this discussion about DACA. And you hear, I mentioned earlier, Luis Gutierrez, congressman from Illinois, who's never loved the wall, has backed away and said, listen, eventually, if we wanted these so-called dreamers to stay, illegals, we're going to have to make a deal because they hold the levers of power.
Yeah.
That's the debate they want to have. But that's also the debate President Trump wants to have. No one wants to shut down. They want to have an immigration. And I think both sides think they win. And that's a big electoral bet for the future.
Well, that's a deal.
Is it with illegals or is it securing the border? And both sides are going to dig their heels in here.
That's technically a deal when both people with skin in the game feel like they got a little something. My question, too, with the wall is Democrats have already voted on this years ago. So I don't understand what the big sticking point was. Was it the lingo? Does this go back to the campaign?
You know what, one of the biggest
and they're still sore because their woman didn't win?
You know, one of the biggest issues was actually, and when you talk about building fences and parts of the wall, it's eminent domain. And you have some of those lawsuits who have made their way through the court system over the better part of 10 years. The exact same thing is going to happen, particularly in Texas, where there's 1,200 miles of border. Only 100 of those miles are federally owned. So you've got all sorts of ranchers and homeowners who are going to make a very sticky situation.
We've seen it in Arizona.
Well, yeah, but more of the land in Arizona is federally owned versus Texas, where people have actually been there. Their families have been there before Texas was Texas. Yeah. And the border crossed them, so to speak, and they're going to have a problem with that. So we talk about these things in simple terms. You just mentioned Democrats voting for the wall or the fence. They've also voted, or at least not voted, right? They've also agreed to ending chain migration and the visa lottery program. So I don't understand why those things are now not even being talked about as part of an agreement.
I wonder
hope
if
they're
it
still
comes
in
back
there.
to what Pete said about the blink.
It's
about the blink.
It's a Schumer blink. Sometimes you see history happening before you. Trump said no immigration until we divorce it from the budget. Schumer and the Democrats said only way we're passing your budget is if we get DACA. Well, what just happened in front of us?
We should remind everybody what the president has tweeted so far today. One of his most recent tweets, end the Democrats' obstruction. That was 2 hours ahead of this vote taking place on the Senate floor. As we watch that, he also said Democrats have shut down our government in the interest of their far-left base. They don't want to do it, but are powerless. He's only tweeted a few times this morning. He's been somewhat quiet.
If you don't think they called Dwight Eisenhower the hidden hand presidency, if you don't think this president does not have a hidden hand behind this debate, then you're wrong. It doesn't matter how many times he's called or how many meetings he's had. He's got a Twitter feed. He's got a rapport with Mitch McConnell. Clearly, Mitch McConnell was able to drive some sort of deal with Schumer to start a debate on immigration. As we've talked about, the question will be what it really is.
And could it have been the president of the United States who started that conversation on Friday as we were all perched to see what would happen as Senator Schumer was headed to the White House?
He made Mitch McConnell jealous. The voting is still happening on the Senate floor, but we can report this. The government will reopen. The vote is still open. I have to remind everybody of that, but they are right now pushing 80 yeses. And, of course, they needed 60 to break the filibuster. As we continue to watch this vote play out, your thoughts? The government will reopen, obviously having over 60 votes now,
over 60
pushing
votes
80.
Means the word went out. It's time for everyone to vote yes. I mean, this will be one of those 90 to something votes where we've probably got Rand Paul and Mike Lee and Ted Cruz voting against it. God bless them. I saw them talking together as well. Where this, from the Freedom Caucus to those groups, where the immigration debate goes forward will be played on the margins. It will be played by, on the left, Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris and others who are running for president. On the right, it'll be dominated by Mark Levin, talk radio, conservative people, the president, who believe that laws need to be laws on the books and enforced. This immigration debate is not going to be easy.
But somewhere in the middle are the American people.
Correct.
And out there in many posts, like you used to be as a veteran, there are people who are serving this country. And so those paychecks won't stop. Now, on February 1st, they will get at least their next round of pay. And again, we have to see what's going to happen on February 8th if we can get past the continuing resolution. These remarks from the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. We watched them live. I just want to remind everybody, he said, quote, "I want to thank the Democratic leader for his comments and his indication that he intends to support the measure before us. I think if we've learned anything during this process, it's that a strategy to shut down the government over the issue of illegal immigration is something the American people didn't understand and would not have understood in the future. So I'm glad we have gotten past that and we have a chance now to get back to work." That's Mitch McConnell.
It's another warning. That in 2.5 weeks and 17 days, if this doesn't go down as the way that the Democrats want to, they shouldn't be tying it to another funding bill.
Think about how low that bar is, though. So congratulations, Washington. You kept the government open for 17 more days.
Oh, man.
And you shut it down over a weekend when it's usually shut down anyway. Good job. Yeah.
Well, this is the first work day where we're seeing it shut down. But again, this is just coming in as we watch this vote continue. The government will reopen. The vote is still open, but they're pushing 80 yeses in the procedural vote that they will also need to pass the actual continuing resolution itself. Same with the House, but Katie, is it safe to say that that will be?
Yeah, I mean, the House issue is just a date issue. It's not a substance issue, so that will go quickly. But the reconciliation on the DACA bill and the agreement that we're hearing about will be much more difficult.
I don't think either side.
To see what's in it.
I don't think either side wins here.
Do you think they have to pass it to show us what's in it?
That's Washington business as usual now.
That's low-hanging fruit.
That's everything.
I had to do it. But the military, by the way, works 24/7. So this is not only a weekday. It's always a weekday for them.
Amen. But also, this continuing resolution is still no good. I mean, you still got sequestration and dramatic cuts to the military. This doesn't fix any of that. So
do you know that it costs the American taxpayer $6 billion extra a week while there's a government shutdown?
Well, and that's why this is so frustrating.
I wish I could give you a complete breakdown, but when you have 1.3 million people in the military in uniform that are potentially on back order for their paychecks, there are things that come into play. You've got military families right now that were perched to see if their death benefits for those they're mourning through the government were going to be made accessible. They were not during a government shutdown.
The readiness issue, I think, is a very big concern. This idea that we continue to fund the military through these CRs and this uncertainty that we continue to see is really pathetic when it comes to Congress doing their job and passing a real budget, which we haven't done in a very long time.
Yeah, but that's the ultimate point. Is it is can kicking.
Right.
And both sides are so incredibly irresponsible with their spending. And it's almost like they want to do that in secret without the confines of a budget or even a spending bill.
They've done other things in secret on Capitol Hill with all sorts of funds.
Hashtag release the memo.
Yeah.
That's right.
There you go.
My goodness gracious.
No, but you're right. Budgets hold Congress accountable for what they've actually allocated, just like they hold families and individuals accountable for the money that they're spending. And it's just so frustrating to continually see this ridiculous charade and circus on Capitol Hill anytime we're up against a hard deadline, and the politics that come into play that actually have absolutely nothing to do with the task at hand, which is funding the government.
Amen. Not to mention, you're not doing a threat assessment about what your enemies are doing. You're not thinking strategically. While China says they've got a 2050 vision of a Chinese dream, and they're building artificial islands, and we can't fund the government for 17 days. I mean,
what's been interesting to watch throughout all this, Kennedy, is the markets. And as we know, they've been at multiple records, I think almost 100 since President Trump was elected into office. Today, the market's been following the ins and outs of these negotiations and talks extremely closely. And now look at that. It's at the highs of the session, as we now know that the government will reopen the Dow's at 80 points higher. Not a huge rally, but it was negative at one point today when it was looking like this vote wasn't going to go in the direction of reopening.
Back to you as a question. The market has never really blinked during this entire shutdown.
It's fair.
So why not? I mean, if uncertainty is what the market...
I'll tell you exactly why. Because they know that it's going to happen, that, this is not a critical impasse, and the markets are very forward-looking, but they also know the corporate profits that will follow from tax reform. forum.
That's a new record, by the way.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Is it?
Look at that.
I'm getting.
And the market, Wall Street will continue to flourish on the promise of those returning corporate profits.
And it's resilient. You know, you asked me to press in, so I am now. So the $6.5 billion a week that a government shutdown could potentially have an effect on negatively would be for the entire economy. So, I mean, we are taxpayers in that economy, but that's potentially what it would be. But as you look at this, though, would that be, and that's based on what we've seen prior with shutdowns, would that even be applicable today? Because we are in such resilient territory right now, at least with investment in corporations and post the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Perhaps that wouldn't be applicable.
Our private economy is in resilient territory, but think about our public debt in our government is nowhere near resilient. So when you talk about $6 billion, it is a drop in the bucket. But in the military context, that's deferred maintenance. That's training that doesn't happen.
Oh, it's true.
That has to happen later on, which means it only gets worse. So as much as I'm happy that the government's open, we have not solved any of our overlying fundamental fiscal issues.
There is a disconnect between Wall Street and that optimism, and people finally feeling those increased hourly wages and GDP growth and some of the other measurable aspects of the economy, and the drama in Washington, because the drama in Washington hasn't served people. That's why they voted for someone like President Trump. But the fact that the economy is doing well, it's very much independent of this insane shutdown and what it symbolizes.
I think it also depends on the issue at hand. When the government is working towards a deregulation that maybe is not going to get done, there's more panic in the marketplace because they feel like they're not going to get that deregulation to be able to grow. The administration throughout the year has been able to take a lot of that regulation off. So they're not working. Tax reform is passed. There isn't a big piece of legislation that's at an impasse right now that would actually benefit businesses.
So hey, just to mention this, because we're getting some color now, the votes, they have it to pass this, but they continue to vote. And as soon as this comes to a close officially, we will let you know. But they're upwards of 80 votes, so they know that they've got this thing and that the government's going to reopen. Some of our producers are live outside the doors of Capitol Hill here and outside the Senate. And so far, Senators Reid, who's a Democrat from Rhode Island, and Cory Booker of New Jersey,
tears of rage,
did not respond to shouted questions on DACA as they were leaving. And you wonder, why would that be? Well, senators who are departing the United States Capitol right now are seeing a few citizen journalists and undocumented immigrant advocates mulling about. So as they, breach the doors of here, when they're done voting, they've got some shouts at them, but these senators so far, Democrats, are not responding.
Make no mistake about it. For Democrats who want to be the president in 2020, this vote is all about that. So it'll be very interesting to see who votes against this ending discussion here, because it'll be the ones that want to go back to their constituents or in a primary and say, hey, I said I would throw down for the Dreamers. I said I would never do it, and I did. So where did Cory Booker vote? Where did Kamala Harris vote? Where did
some interesting reaction coming in from the vote, again, that is still ongoing. Democrat Senator Tester, facing competitive re-election this fall, votes no on the procedural vote to reopen the government. Some color there.
Democrats voted no or yes?
Voted no.
No.
Democrats Stabenow and Nelson, up this fall in competitive races, voted yes.
Interesting. No, I think I want to see the final vote tally, which will be as close of an indicator as we're going to get of the modern Democratic Party, which has been very much in flux. Are they trying to moderate and win in these states where Trump won by being pro-worker, or are they going to run to the left where their base is and being pro-illegal immigrant? I mean, that's really what's at stake here.
All right, so we're continuing. By the way, Senator Tester from the state of Montana, as far as the one that voted no. That's colorful. So we're waiting for this vote.
Maybe he's running for president.
This vote to come to a close.
Why wouldn't he?
So we can't with certainty say that the government will reopen until this vote actually closes. It is still ongoing. But what an hour, what a day, what a weekend it has been.
Yeah.
Katie,
I'm glad it has been short. That is the one thing I am not happy about, except for traffic in D.C. today was very minimal, and I will be very sad that it will be hot and heavy again when we get back.
It's interesting, though, because, as we started this discussion on the couch before Senator Schumer spoke, it was, we were wondering whether or not they would push this shutdown to State of the Union. Another 8 days until the president addresses both chambers of Congress. Yeah. And, what a victory that would be for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party that you were talking about. But the fact that Chuck Schumer led the charge and gave everyone cover to go ahead and vote to end the filibuster.
Just tweeted this out, Senator Chuck Schumer. Soon the government will reopen, and we have a lot to do. Hashtag protect dreamers, write a budget, address healthcare, veterans, disaster relief, pensions, and the opioid epidemic.
Because the Democrats...
The hashtag Trump shutdown will soon end, but the work goes on.
Democrats did such a great job taking care of veterans as well. Yeah. I mean,
listen, thanks, Bernie Sanders.
Exactly. Great job with that single payer. It's really worked.
No, when he was the head of the Veterans Affairs Committee.
He did nothing during the scandal when we know there were secret
veterans died on his watch.
That tweet right there, Sandra, what you just read, is exactly what people are sick of in Washington, D.C. It's fake deadlines, fake issues, tons of rhetoric, lots of hashtags, none of which tied to what affects people's lives or policy that will actually change it. That's why I think Chuck Schumer knew. This was the Schumer shutdown. President Trump stared him down. Now we'll talk about a real debate. And they got to be worried now whether they can win that debate, too, because they have to decide which part of their base they're going to cater to. Whereas President Trump and Republicans, who he's taught how to fight, Trump has fought Republicans. They're taught Republicans how to fight. They know we're with American citizens, America first. Where will Democrats
Because
be?
we are following this minute by minute, our producer on Capitol Hill just writing that we are now waiting for Corker to vote on the procedural vote, Senator Corker, to reopen the government. Senator McCain should be the only absence when they close the vote.
There's your vote right there.
81-18.
81-18. Bob Corker, former Republican.
Okay, yay 81, nay 18.
Thank you, Mr. President. First,
shall we dip in and listen? 81, nay 18. So obviously they've gotten the votes that they need. The government will reopen.
Crisis is over, everybody. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, at least for 17 days. It's like going to a spa.
Yeah.
How relaxing.
You can now call the Agriculture Department, and they will answer their phone.
Yeah.
Shortly, but actually not, because this is, as you mentioned, a procedural vote to end debate. Then they'll vote again on something which only needs 51 votes. Then it'll go back to the House.
Right.
Who knows how long that'll actually happen.
I do think
it's not a real shutdown.
I do think it's worth pointing out how the Trump administration handled the shutdown versus the Obama administration, which they have tried to do at the White House, in the sense that Barack Obama, as soon as he knew a shutdown was coming, immediately used it for political gain. I remember being in Washington, D.C. and seeing those barricades that they had to have people unpaid put up because they're never around the monuments any other time of year, but they specifically had them put up, and veterans took them down and marched them to the White House. I will never forget that. And so they have handled this in a way that is much different than the previous administration did, and have not used it to their advantage. They have used it in a way to get what's best for
President Obama would have shut down Disneyland if
he would have.
But are you talking about weaponizing government? I mean, Democrats will weaponize government at times. Hashtag release the memo.
Release the memo. What's in there? I would like to know.
Absolutely.
I think now that we have averted the shutdown, not averted, but at least, marched away from the mire, then let's get our eyes on that memo, see what's really in there. How has government power been abused?
Yeah, get back to other issues like FBI bias.
Some other color happening right now. Senator Richard Shelby did stop by our cameras there at one of our stakeout cams. He came to the microphone and said it's a good thing that there is a move to reopen the government and that hopefully the immigration issue can be resolved.
I will also note, inside the Republican Party, repealing and replacing Obamacare was universally popular for Republicans. Tax cuts, universal for Republicans. Immigration is always the wedge that has differentiated this president. It's his issue. It's what he came down the escalator to talk about. It's divided Republicans. Where this debate goes will be very interesting as far as how much President Trump has turned his agenda into the Republican agenda. How much does he get in exchange for some level of legalization for DACA?
Well, what do you want him to be? Do you want him to be the deal maker president, or do you want him to be the hardliner who chose the
I think he should be a hardliner, but I think he can do both because he is a deal maker. Drive the hard line, force the Democrats to define what they're for, which is for illegals, and then get a problem solved so that we don't have to revisit this decades down the line.
But I guarantee you Democrats are going to overstep their bounds here. They're going to turn DACA into amnesty for people who aren't eligible for DACA, and that's where the problem is going to be, and they're going to turn around and accuse Republicans of not wanting to protect dreamers when they have moved the parameters of who is actually covered. They're going to want to go to comprehensive immigration reform rather than sticking with DACA, which is what the president said.
I don't have a problem with fixing immigration in this country because I think that's why you have so many problems.
But you can't do it in 17 days, right?
No, you cannot. You're absolutely right. So, but if they really want to fix the problem, they have to be responsible adults. I don't think anyone in Congress at this point point is
it's a high
capable of
bar,
doing that.
Kennedy.
It's
The
way too high.
responsible adult issue is a high bar for them.
2 words that have never been said in Washington.
Well, this crucial vote that we were expecting in the noon hour, it has the Senate has successfully passed this vote that was meant to break the filibuster to then eventually get the government back up and running again. The Senate has successfully voted to get that done. You're continuing to see some words spoken on the Senate floor. It has been an eventful ride. We'll see where this goes. A lot more is going to be happening right here on the Fox News channel. Harris Faulkner has continuing coverage.
And we will continue now with the big vote, 81-18, putting our government back in play now, opening the doors of our government again with a continuing resolution that now goes until February 8th. And the deal that Democrats say that they got, per their leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, Senator Schumer says that they got a deal to then immediately tackle legislation for DACA and the Dreamers program. That they had supposedly about a week or two ago. So what in fact happened that changed here is that Democrats voted with Republicans to reopen the government. I'm Harris Faulkner. You're watching our continuing coverage today as the shutdown ends, at least temporarily, on Capitol Hill. This is Outnumbered Overtime. Let's bring in my very first guest because he is in the Senate. It's Colorado Senator Cory Gardner. He sits on the Budget Committee and chairs the Senate GOP's campaign arm, a very important person to talk with right now. What happened in that room that changed things, Senator?
Well, it is curious because the same basic offer was made Friday night to Senator Schumer that we would have a 3-week CR, go to February 8th, and that we would turn to the issue of DACA immigration. That was rejected resoundingly on Friday night. Here we are on Monday after having shut the federal government down by Senator Schumer for several days, saying basically we'll go back to that same deal that was rejected on Friday night. So if the first rule of holes is quit digging, I guess they finally figured out a way to quit digging today.
Yeah, and what does this do actually going forward? Because there was the talk from the president in a tweet that maybe Republicans should go nuclear, which means you would push to a 51% majority and burn the Democrats on this deal by just pushing it forward. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, you have so many people who are saying that we should look at the filibuster, and I think the kind of behavior that we saw exhibited gives people reason to have conversations about what needs to change in the Senate, because the behavior is preventing people from solving things that people actually agree need to be solved. And so I hope that over the next several weeks we can craft a solution that the president will support. He laid out the 4 things that need to be supported, and that we don't have this minority filibuster again that stops the majority who agree it needs to be solved from doing their work.
Yeah, you know, this is being talked about. As you may know, it was a hashtag Schumer shutdown that caught fire and went viral online over the last few days. The question remains, you know, is this something that could have been handled and we didn't have to shut down? Why did we get to this point?
Absolutely, it could have been handled. Look, I mean, we had more than 50 votes necessary. We had a bipartisan majority in support of funding the government last week when the government got shut down, because Senator Schumer insisted on a filibuster, meaning that you had to have 60 votes and then refused to provide the votes necessary to keep the government open. And so this is a problem that Senator Schumer is going to have to explain around the country why he shut the government down, why he rejected a deal that he basically agreed to today. But the most important thing, though, is to solve the challenges the American people face. That's the issue of DACA. I've been a part of a bipartisan group to fix this. Let's put together a solution that passes the Senate, the House, that the president supports. I think that's very important.
All right. So when Senator Dick Durbin, also a Democrat who spoke after Schumer today on the floor right before you all voted yes, we're going to reopen the government a few minutes ago, Durbin said, we've gathered the largest group of bipartisan supporters to move on DACA. You say you're working on bipartisan legislation. What do you have?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've tried to address the 4 parts of what President Trump said. Border security, there's more work that needs to be done there. There's other bipartisan groups coming together, figuring out how we can get that done to provide enough certainty on security dollars for the border wall system that he talked about. But I also think we have to address the issue, as President Trump says, of chain migration in a way that gains his support, that gains Republican support, bipartisan. The only way it's going to pass out of the Senate is if it has bipartisan support. The only way it's going to get to the president's desk and he will sign it is if he supports it. So So we do have a large group on both sides of the aisle in both chambers that agree there needs to be a solution. How do we address children who are brought here through a very young age, no fault of their own? We agree with that. The details are going to be tricky. This is not going to be easy. But the fact is, I think today you saw a Senate committed to achieve what the president has asked and to make sure that we, more importantly, achieve what we have to for this country to secure our borders and solve one of the most vexing immigration challenges we've ever faced.
Senator Gardner, I have been describing it this way, that when you kick the can down the road, it looks like the back of a VW that just, the participants inside just got married. Is that what we just did again?
In many respects, we'll find out. In 3 weeks, if we kicked the can and we just wore the darn can out instead of actually getting the job done, we're about to find out. If we do this, then, you could end up in the same kind of shutdown politics again. Wow. I hope not. I hope we don't have the shutdown politics. Senator McConnell made it very clear that we need to fix our defense spending. We need to adjust the caps. We have to address opiate addiction. There are so many things that we need to work on. But the collateral damage of a shutdown is simply unacceptable. The collateral damage to spouses of those in the military who are uncertain about the paychecks, the collateral damage of those in opioid treatment plans funded by the federal government. What happens to those? In Colorado, we know there were 6,000 civilians who were faced the potential furlough in Colorado Springs, people who support our critical defense mission, our critical space efforts. That kind of collateral damage is simply unacceptable, and that's why I do not understand why Senator Schumer chose to drive the Senate, drive the government, into a shutdown in the first place.
Senator Gardner, from the great state of Colorado, at least the government is reopened for today through February 8th. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. We're going to go now live. You see Senators Collins, Republican, and Manchin, Democrat, talking about the vote today. If they continue to talk, let's press in and watch together.
So can you talk about what specifically changed? Or
let me just say the basic, every meeting that we were in Susan's office and the meetings that Susan and I had separately, was always an optimistic meeting. We always knew that there was a pathway forward, and it was a reasonable pathway forward. Most importantly, should we have ever shut the government down? Absolutely not. But there was other people that felt differently. But the bottom line was not to keep it shut down. It should never be shut down past this past weekend. We knew that. So we were all moving in a very positive movement towards that. But leadership was still in that jousting, both back and forth. I'm only going to say this. The system must change. The rules of the Senate have to change. I'm speaking for myself, not for our bipartisan group. This is me. I don't believe that either leader on either side should have the powers that they have. That's me speaking, that two people, whether it be Mitch or Chuck, whoever's in the majority and the minority, should be in a position of that much power to be able to set an agenda or stop an agenda when you have a force as strong as ours moving in a direction. And I will tell you, they listen. And that's what moved it, because we weren't backing off. We weren't going to be beat into submission. Oh, no, we're going to do this and that. But I think if we looked at anything, it's the rules of the Senate. How do we make the place work better? How come committees don't work? How come committee chairs don't have input? How come the appropriation bills aren't working? How do we get to this point? So, with that being said, we were always optimistic, Susan.
Let me just add a little bit to what Joe has said. First of all, every single difficult negotiation that I have ever been in the 21 years that I've been privileged to serve in the Senate, has had these peaks and valleys, and this was no different. But in the end, I give our leaders a lot of credit for listening to the ideas that we put forward and for showing some flexibility after starting out being pretty dug in. And obviously, ultimately, it was the decisions made by Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer that brought us to this point. But I believe that our group, by giving them specific ideas for how to move forward, and because of the size and bipartisan nature of our group, played a very instrumental role in breaking the impasse.
You get an awful lot of people from the outside pushing, and you start pushing the envelope from the far right and far left. Chuck and Mitch had to come together for the good of the country and said, we hear you loud and clear. You're going to get a chance. You're going to get your voices heard. You're going to get a chance to have votes on certain things. But we've got to open this government up and move forward. Right back here. Yeah.
Both senators, the proposal that Mitch McConnell put forward, is it the same one that you guys brought to him, or is it some iteration on that?
It's It's a variation on the theme, but it is it does reflect the approach that we suggested, which is that government would be reopened. We would all continue to work on the global issues that are still out there, such as budget cap, and if those issues were not resolved, then by a date certain, he would bring to the Senate floor a vehicle for the immigration issues to be resolved, including border security and the DACA or Dreamer population. So I think we helped shape it, but ultimately it reflected the negotiations of the two leaders.
We never tried to write the bill in our groups. The Common Cause, the Common Sense Coalition, our purpose wasn't sit in there and write a piece of legislation and say, here, put this up, this is what we want. It was basically, these people should be heard, and this process should work to have those people heard, and they should have their day. Now, the time constraints, we're all cognizant of the time constraints we're working under. March 5th is a drop dead. February 8th is another drop dead. So you got 2 dates you're working on right now. How can we make this happen? So can we concise that of what we agree on? Both leaders are working on this, what they can agree on, to put on the floor kind of a open type of a process directed in one direction for the purpose of the DACA population.
Time for one more.
So are you expecting a vote prior to February 8th or after February 8th on the immigration bill? Which is it, before or after the 8th?
Well, that depends on the outcome of the global negotiations that are going on. I believe, as laid out by Leader McConnell, if there is not a global agreement on issues ranging from defense spending, domestic spending, budget caps, the healthcare issues that are still out there, the immigration issues, then the immigration bill, if there's not an agreement, the immigration bill would be brought to the bill as a separate piece of legislation, or there'd be a vehicle.
60-vote threshold on caps. So Democrats have the ability or opportunity to make sure there's a process they're heard. That's what they're going to use. In a reasonable way. Some people might be unreasonable in certain aspects of each caucus, but in a reasonable way, there's a process for it. That's what they demanded, and that's what they got. Mitch, I think, was very gracious in saying what he said today made all the difference in the world. His speech this morning opened up the avenue that we needed and the vehicle we needed to carry forth. That's going to happen. And the pressure is going to be on, basically, when we get our job done, then Paul Ryan has to do his job. We can't do the House's job. We can't dictate to what the president and the executive branch is going to do.
Wow. Okay. So, and around we go. You hear Senators Collins of Maine, Republican, and Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Democrat. They're together, kind of a visual aid, if you will, reminding us that this was a bipartisan vote today to reopen the government. But the two sides wear it very differently. You saw as we opened the program this hour, Senator Gardner of the great state of Colorado telling me, you know what, we got 17 days. This could happen again if they can't move forward on certain issues. And you heard Senator Collins ticking those off. Budget cap. And she says if those and other issues are not resolved by February 8th, then they would be brought forth by a mechanism or a vehicle, as you heard them saying, in which they'll tackle DACA. But then Senator Manchin there just called it a drop-dead date. Again, agreeing with the Republican Gardner on this, that they got to get something done in 17 days or we come right back with our faces pressed up against the glass of a government shutdown. Let's bring in Hugo Gurdon, editorial director for the Washington Examiner. And Hugo, as you watch today, what is your first thought on where we have been in just the last little while? The government has been reopened by a bipartisan vote, and then you get a news conference that says, well, we got 17 days to do this.
Well, hi, Harris. Yeah, look, the crucial thing is that before the weekend, when this deal was offered, the Democrats didn't take it. They insisted that an immigration reform bill be attached to the spending bill. The two are unrelated, but they decided to relate them and hold the country and the government hostage for 3 days. Chuck Schumer and the Democrats have backed down. They've now detached those things. The truth is that the DACA bill, will come forward on February the 8th if the spending has not been sorted out. But that doesn't mean they're going to get the DACA fix that they want. There will be all the other issues that have already been mentioned. And the Republicans and the Democrats have been through this before. And the Republicans, look, you probably recall, in 1986, there was a big reform. There was amnesty and border security. The amnesty happened and the border security didn't. And I don't think that President Trump or the Republicans on Capitol Hill want to go around that route again. They're going to make sure that things like border security and chain migration are ended.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I had in my notes here to ask you, do you think we're missing the facts about what some are reporting to say that the president did not take a substantive part in all of this? I think we might be, because the last person to meet with Chuck Schumer was the president of the United States, and we were all waiting to see, like flies on the wall, what was going to happen on Friday out of that. And then you have a situation where the Democrats basically capitulate.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's very likely that the president has taken even though in a back seat, he's been talking to them. Now, one of the things that the Democrats have said, and there's some truth in this, is that the president did not really supply leadership. He changed his position a couple of times, so we got closer and closer to the deadline without it being clear where the Republicans, in particular the president, wanted to go. But this was a Democratic shutdown, and I think that the president would have said to Chuck Schumer, and Chuck Schumer would have recognized over the last 3 days, that unlike previous shutdowns, the Democrats were starting to get blamed for this. And the Trump administration was very clever in the way that this shutdown was managed. Instead of doing what President Obama did, which was to make it as painful as possible and shutting World War II veterans out of the World War II memorial and things which were really visible and kind of harsh. Right. You had the administration.
People's House. I remember that. The White House.
Yeah. Exactly. You had the administration this time. I think there was a story about the Interior Secretary, Mr. Zinke, actually picking up trash, and they were going to keep the parks open. And so I think the Republicans were being seen as more reasonable on this, and the Democrats were seen as attaching a completely unrelated immigration reform to the government spending bill.
I talk about the president's participation, and I think it works in this way as well. And it came via a tweet, but that 51% threat of a nuclear option for the Senate, he wasn't telling them to do that until he did in a tweet.
Right.
Which was interesting. And if anybody thought that he was blinking, what was the fact?
Yeah, I think it would be a very bad idea to end the filibuster. When he was majority leader,
but Democrats no doubt took him seriously.
Oh, they did. They did. And I think that he's said this before, and I think that the Mitch McConnell and the Republicans on Capitol Hill have resisted this, and they don't want it. I think that, conservatives everywhere should feel it's a good idea to have the filibuster because it has been a brake on the expansion of government. But the Democrats brought this on themselves by ending the filibuster for judicial nominees, and then Mitch McConnell used it to get Judge Neil Gorsuch confirmed to the Supreme Court. That's very different, though, from ending the filibuster on all legislation. I would not advocate it, and I hope Republicans on Capitol Hill don't go there.
I had a question just about the fact that we now know that Chuck Schumer saw this deal or some variation of it that was very close to what he ended up getting today by leading the Democrats to helping Republicans reopen the government. He potentially saw this last week, last week. If that's the case, I now better understand why Dreamers are so angry with the Democrats, because in their perspective, it would seem, based on that fact and that reporting, that this is a deal that they had before the Democrats, and now they have the same deal for potentially getting something done about DACA and the Dreamers, that they were a pawn kind of in all of this.
I think that the Dreamers are gradually beginning to see that they are always a pawn for the Democrats. The truth is that when the Democrats had the House, the Senate, and the presidency under President Obama, they had and a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. They had the opportunity to fix this, but instead of fixing it, they went into the 2010 election with the president saying, "Go out and reward your friends and punish your enemies. Bring us back, victory in the 2010 election." It didn't work. They much rather have this as an issue going into elections, which is why you've seen it being played this way in a year when we had the 2018 midterms. They like it as an issue. But gradually, I think that immigrants are going to realize that they are being played for suckers by the Democrats,
Wow.
and that that the party would much rather have them as an issue to beat the Republicans with than actually fix the problem.
All right, Hugo Gurdon, thank you very much for helping us break it down as it is happening live right now and continuing to. Thank you very much. Senator Jeff Flake votes a lot with the president, has been critical of him. What does he say about today?
Particularly about the fairness of the process, in terms of picking a bill or how the motion to proceed would work. And that was convincing to the Democrats.
Do you trust Mitch McConnell?
I do think that a commitment made like this today with such fanfare, and this is for what will happen 3 weeks from now, I think we can count on it.
Does it show that compromise is back and possible?
I hope so. I hope so. We had this meeting, these meetings in Susan Collins' office, a growing number of people, and it was really good to see.
So
it'll be nice. It'll be nice to see, actually, to have a process on the Senate floor that we haven't seen for a long time, really since the bipartisan immigration bill that we did before, where we went through regular order and dealt with amendments, and everybody had their say. This will be much like that, I think.
You've been trying to negotiate a bill on immigration for months now, though. What makes this different?
Well, what has been difficult is dealing with the White House and not knowing where the president is. And that was what was holding us back and holding Mitch McConnell from his commitment to move to the floor. No, it hasn't, but that's what I'm saying. I don't think it will change. I hope that it does. I hope that the president will say, here's what we need and here's what we'll stick with. But if we don't, what we've said is we'll come to the Senate floor, and the Senate will be the Senate again. And we'll pass something and then see if the president likes it.
Senator Flake, how long? Today?
We want to get a deal before March 5th. I think that the worst outcome would be to get to March 5th and then try to jam something through which would look something like the legislative equivalent of DACA, where we make it constitutional, but it's no more certain for these kids, and they'd have to wait for something more certain again, and that's not good. I'm convinced a deal would be done, but it just wouldn't be permanent.
Do you believe the deal can be done without Trump?
It's victory for, I think, everybody when the government opens back up. But we're climbing out of the hole. Let's get it. We haven't done anything yet other than open up the government, hopefully at about 2:30 when we have the final vote today.
Can a deal be done without the president's leadership?
Ultimately, the president is going to need to get on board in order for the House to vote on it. The House still much more so than the Senate, relies on the backing of the president.
Have you talked to Speaker Ryan about this? You have been friends.
I have. I talked to him, and that's his message as well. It's going to be very difficult to pass anything through the House without the president's support. We acknowledge that. But what we're saying is we can't wait for the president to indicate his support before starting the process here. If we can pass a bill, obviously if it passes the Senate, it's a bipartisan bill by definition. It'll have at least 60 votes, I think closer to 70. And if that gets to the White House, I'm confident the president will say, I like this. And then it can move through the House.
Has the Speaker told you that he will put the Senate immigration bill on the floor?
No, he hasn't. So he doesn't have to. He can put another bill and we can deal with it in conference. That's how we usually work it. And so, no, he doesn't have to put the Senate bill. But I do think if the president gets behind it, then it's something that they'll want to put on the House floor.
What are the next steps for the bipartisan group of senators?
Well, to make sure that we have a bill. I mean, if we do go to regular order, somewhat regular order, we're not going to go through committee. But if we bring something to the floor, keep in mind that if everybody offers amendments and you deal with the process under the Senate rules, it can be a long process. So we're still going to need some consent and some kind of agreement to move ahead. And to do that, you've got to have a product that has wide support. And that's what we're hoping to do, is broaden the support that we already have with the bipartisan bill. We have 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans. But broaden that, add some border security elements that people on my side of the aisle want. I'm sure the Democrats will want some things as well. But if we can broaden that product, the support for that product, we can have an easier time when we get to February 8th.
And when you talk about border security, how much of that is a physical border wall?
Well, Senator Schumer indicated that he was willing to give additional money. What is on the table so far and what we have in the bill so far is what the president has requested for this next year. If additional commitments need to be made in terms of a mix of authorization and appropriation beyond that time, we'll do that. But is it going to be a wall? The president has said, not all of it is a wall. Some of it's a fence. Most of it's a fence, actually. But it's a border wall system, I guess you can call it. Whatever it is, it'll be additional border security, and that's important. So,
thank you very much.
All right, so very interesting from Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona, who's been so critical on the Senate floor, making speeches about the president, anti the president, but also voting north of 90% of the time with President Trump's policies. Did you catch the news there? He said Senator Schumer of the Democrats has indicated he's ready to give more money for the wall or the wall system. Let's bring in Republican Congressman Mac Thornberry, who is chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. He joins me now. Thank you so much for being here. First of all, I just want to get your idea on what we just heard about the wall and the fact that Senator Schumer had to come to the table now with something different, and he had a deal last week. Your thoughts on what's transpired today from your perch?
Well, I think Senator Schumer saw some polls that were not going in his favor. A lot of the reason for that is because of the damage that was being done to the United States military during this shutdown. And so I really think that's the broader issue that today does not solve. For several months, we've had some folks on Capitol Hill who have been willing to hold military funding hostage to some other issue, whether it was increasing funding on a domestic issue or, in this case, some sort of immigration issue. And unfortunately, we have seen damage every step of the way as long as they've been doing that.
You know, on the Armed Services Committee, I know that this is an issue that you must have been talking about in detail over the weekend. I can only imagine how many military families you've heard from. Today I was reading mourning military families would not be getting government death benefits with regard to a government shutdown. That's just heartbreaking. You had 1.3 million uniformed military personnel in stay-ready position waiting to see if they were going to get paychecks on February 1st. It's been solved potentially at least for the next 17 days. But, you know, we've been through this before, Congressman, and 16 days the last go-around. What did you learn about protecting military families that didn't work out this time? Can't we fix that and make it separate?
We've got to fix it, and we have got to make it separate. You are really getting to the heart of the issue. As long as we are making military funding conditional on some other issue, whether it's immigration or EPA funding or whatever it is, as long as we're doing that, we're making these men and women who are risking their lives for us political pawns. And so now they will get their paycheck, but we are back under these stopgap spending measures that really damages their readiness. It does not allow them to issue new contracts. It does not allow them to train the way that they should. And you're exactly right. Unfortunately, we lost 2 soldiers Saturday morning in a helicopter accident. Now those death benefits can be paid, but we have lost too many people because of accidents, because of this political gamesmanship that has gone on way too long with our military.
Oh, I want to talk more about that. Congressman Thornberry, what you're talking about is the fact that our readiness is actually even affected under this continuing resolution because it only goes 17 days. Who can plan anything in that time?
No, you're exactly right. And again, this has been what we've been operating under since October. These series of stopgap measures, nobody can plan. But in addition, under this sort of funding, you've got to do exactly what you did last year, whether you need to or not. So, for example, last Friday, the Pentagon just came out with a new national security strategy that says we're going to pay more attention to Russia and China. Well, nothing can be adjusted under this budget under these stopgap spending measures. Wow. So that's the heart of this matter. As long as we hold the military hostage for some other issue, then we're not going to be able to defend the country the way they should, the way we should.
And if the Pentagon is telling us that there are countries we need to watch, and the military knows they need to do it, that's not just happening because somebody thought it was a good idea in the room. That has to do, I would imagine, Congressman, with national security. So does this affect our national security?
Absolutely. We have never had more complex national security threats all at the same time than we're having right now. And everybody is focused on North Korea, but and Iran, what they're doing. Terrorists have not gone away, Russia, China. And so you've got to have a budget that reflects that. But for months, we have been under these stopgap spending rules because people are willing to use the military as a political hostage. That's the heart of this matter, and that's what we've got to get away from.
Yeah, look, there are always going to be political pawns, and because it's politics on Capitol Hill, I get that. But the military rides in a different position. They are our ride or die people. They protect us. We don't want them to park their rides, and we don't want to give them any reason to do that. This affects morale, too. I know I've talked with enough military current and veterans to know that. I appreciate so much your time, Congressman Thornberry. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, as we await the White House briefing, we'll talk with Congressman Jim Jordan about the shutdown and how the House plans to deal with the Senate's bill, which now goes back to the House. We'll also ask him about the FBI's revelation. Did you hear about this? That it is now missing 5 months of text messages between two officials accused of anti-Trump bias.
Metals, where gold and silver have been the family business for more than 40 years. Call Augusta now.
Government shutdown averted. Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. Let's watch.
The mistake that was made then in 2013 by Senate Republican leadership was to turn and attack House Republicans and fellow Republicans and to turn Republicans on each other. That was a mistake. I wish it had not happened. And I'm glad it didn't happen this time. This time, Republicans actually stayed united. But the media love to write the story, love to broadcast the story, that any shutdown is Republicans' fault. That is a natural media reflex. It's actually, I think, one of the reasons why we saw a shutdown. Because I think Chuck Schumer and the Democrats believed they could shut the government down, and reporters would dutifully blame it on Republicans no matter what the facts were.
On this shutdown, do you support what Leader McConnell has done here, to promise to take up DACA, to take some action to protect Dreamers in exchange for this temporary fix?
My understanding is that Mitch McConnell has said we'll have votes on immigration. I think there's a lot of things we should do on immigration. I think we need to improve border security. I think we need to pass Kate's Law, which is legislation that I introduced, providing for mandatory minimum sentences for aggravated felons who repeatedly illegally enter this country. I think there's a lot we should do on immigration. I think it would be a serious mistake for us to pass an amnesty bill providing amnesty and a path to citizenship for millions of people here illegally, along with chain migration. I think that would be an enormous mistake. Congress might do that. I hope it doesn't. And I think doing so would be inconsistent with the promises we made the American people in 2016.
It sounds like what you're describing is comprehensive immigration reform, not a more narrow DACA.
All right, and there you see Senator Ted Cruz walking away. And just to catch you up, in case you're just tuning in to Outnumbered Overtime now, we have had so much breaking news in about the last 90 minutes or so on Capitol Hill as a bipartisan vote was put forth with more than 80 yays, 81 to 18 was the vote today to reopen the government, which has been shut down, as you know, for 3 days. We've been talking this hour and also covering the breaking news from members of Congress who've come forward. And inside the Senate, you saw what's being described as a blink by the Democrat side. The leader of the Democrats had technically the same type deal that he had agreed upon today to reopen the government. He had it late last week. Why Democrats didn't move on that, you'll have to go to Senator Chuck Schumer to get more detail. But what we know from his Senate floor talk today was because he was waiting to see what could happen in terms of the Dreamers and DACA. Well, he technically got the same thing that he had late last week. But we are moving forward because Democrats joined Republicans today to reopen the government. Let's bring in Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan, a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Always great to see you. We've got a lot to get to. But first, let's talk. The House gets this now. And you fully anticipate to do what?
Oh, I think it'll pass later this afternoon, maybe early evening. I think it'll pass. And then we need to get about the people's business, which is on the immigration policy. We have a good bill in the House sponsored by Judiciary Chairman Goodlatte, Raul Labrador's Chairman McCall, that does all the things, as Mr. Cruz was talking about, Senator Cruz was talking about, does all the things we promised the American people we were going to do in the 2016 election, dealing with the border security wall, chain migration, visa lottery, sanctuary cities, dealing with those issues, and then addressing the DACA issue as well. But doing it in that prioritizing manner is what was consistent with the 2016 election. So let's pass that legislation and do the right kind of thing.
Has that changed awfully much since what? I mean, I was just reporting that Senator Schumer, from what we're hearing from Republicans and Democrats alike, that what he's just agreed to is not too different than what he might have looked at last week.
I think you're right, but I think as Senator Cruz pointed out, sometimes they felt that the media would blame Republicans for this when it was obvious that this was the amnesty shutdown. Now the government's reopened. Let's do the work we were sent here to do by the American people. Let's do what we said, do what we were elected to accomplish.
All right. And I appreciate you telling us what's going to happen later this afternoon. Their first in about an hour will be that official, back in the Senate again, vote to reopen the government officially now. What we saw before was kind of a preamble to this. But if you couldn't do that, you certainly couldn't get to 2:30 p.m. Eastern. And then it goes to the House. You anticipate it to pass. Let's talk about what's happening inside the FBI.
Famous exoneration letter from gross negligence, which is a criminal standard, to extreme carelessness. Peter Strzok, who helped run the Russian investigation, interviewed Mike Flynn. That Peter Strzok, with all these text messages between him and Lisa Page, where they talk about Trump should not be elected president, we need an insurance policy, he should lose $100 million to zero. Now we find out 5 months of text messages between these two individuals come up missing. This is like the dog ate my homework. The excuse they...
Well, the Senate now is going to vote to end the filibuster and end the shutdown, but blame game now is not over. How we got here is well underway. Republicans blaming Democrats. Democrats are pointing the finger at President Trump. Who's really at fault, and how does it play with votes?